Roland Martin was the first round leader in Chattanooga. Here's a guy who had never won the Classic before, dying to win the Classic.
I had the winning weight the first day. Just as the day ended, Yearbook shows up. And I'm saying, oh my God, those guys are spraying right here in this car.
Charlie Reed was a great story.
Of all things, Charlie Reed caught a limit every day out of one spot the first few minutes he was there.
One of the most memorable stories in Classic history is the introduction of Danny Correa.
I really believe I can win this. It's just for some reason it felt like I was going to win this tournament.
You know, Chattanooga's got this kind of a Americana spin to it. And I remember the Chattanooga Choo Choo, you know, the old song.
Pardon me, boy, is that the Chattanooga Choo Choo? Track 29, well, you can give me a shine.
The city of Chattanooga is one of these cities that truly embraces bass fishing because of the both Chickamauga and Nickajack right there on the Tennessee River.
Anybody in that tournament had a chance to win that. I mean, Nickajack, Chickamauga, I mean, at that time when it had a lot of grass in it, it had some giant stringers to be caught.
Well, they're both river lakes, but Nickajack is definitely a river lake with very little major backwaters in it.
Chickamauga, which is above Chattanooga, that goes on up. That's a big, huge lake. It's like 40,000 acres. It's huge.
Nickajack, I don't think had the fish population. It had good-looking structure and a lot of heavy grass.
The fish in Nickajack sometimes, back then especially, had a history for being better fish.
You might go to Nickajack and catch one big string and then go down there and zero the next 2 days. Whereas in Chickamauga, you may only catch a much smaller string, but you can do it consistently.
The Classic competitors were no strangers to the Chattanooga area. Just a few months prior, the season-ending Super Invitational was held on the same two bodies of water.
I had forgotten that the Classic was held the same place that we had the last tournament of the year.
That was very odd. We normally don't go to a body of water that hosts a Classic at all the previous year.
What is interesting to me was Jimmy Houston, who had won the Angler of the Year that year, and Jimmy had been second in the tournament, the previous tournament at Chickamauga.
The year in '86 was probably a gift rather than an accomplishment. If I was to list the priorities in my life at that time or now, tournaments would be very far down that line.
Don't believe everything Jimmy tells you about that. Jimmy is probably as competitive as anybody I ever seen. And if he tells you that he just relaxed, don't you ever believe it.
The tournaments to me have always been more or less a getaway.
My hat's off to Jimmy for winning Angler of the Year and still doing his TV show, fishing all the tournaments. He had a lot of ventures going, so he didn't have time to go out and practice on these lakes like some of the full-time pros do.
What he does, he goes in and films lakes ahead of time, and he doesn't blame it on the pre-fishing. He's filming, but he's pre-fishing is what he's doing.
Jimmy certainly had the reputation of being like the bionic fisherman at that time. He was the guy that could go out there and probably make 50% more cast than the rest of us could. He was one of the guys that started with a little underhand roll cast, and he was almost always fishing with a spinnerbait.
In his heyday, there was not a better spinnerbait fisherman in America, and even today, I don't think there's any fisherman who know more about spinnerbait fishing than Jimmy.
Jimmy and I are real close friends. I love him to death. But he's a spinnerbait fisherman. I'll tell him to his face. He and I argue all the time about it. I said, Jimmy, you can't live on a spinnerbait. Oh, I can. That's all. I'm going to catch him on it. Or if I don't catch him on a spinnerbait, I'm not going to catch him. That's his way of thinking.
And he won Angler of the Year largely throwing a spinnerbait.
We were on bodies of water where the spinnerbait really dominated.
You have to look at Angler of the Year for what it is. The person that's going to win Angler of the Year is going to deserve it regardless of what.
Jimmy Houston was certainly on a roll that year. You just felt like, you know, hey, he's got a good chance of winning any time and anywhere.
He was on top of the world right then, having won Angler of the Year. Everyone's, you know, well, you're going to win this tournament. You're going to do the daily double here, but it didn't happen.
It wasn't a spinnerbait tournament. As it turned out, it wasn't a spinnerbait tournament. I think that hurt Jimmy a lot.
I zeroed the first day of that tournament. I think there was 2 people that zeroed the first day of that tournament, Hank Parker and myself.
Reed was a great story.
Charlie got a lot of teasing before the classic about being the oldest rookie.
And I'd always make fun of him being an old man, drink his Geritol and all that stuff. You know, I said, Charlie, you'd have been out here early with just putting all that grease and formula on your hair.
The thing that stands out most in my mind about that classic was the impact of state officials treating the vegetation with chemicals.
Corps of Engineers had a spraying program, which they'd come out with a chemical called 2,4-D. 2,4-D is a very noxious chemical.
Aquatic vegetation, if you're a bass fisherman, it's the mother's milk of fishing as far as cover. But if you're on a little TVA lake or some Corps of Engineer lakes which have a navigational purpose, heavy milfoil will clog the channels. So at the time, it was a great spraying program that went on.
The worst thing you can ever have happen is to have somebody spray 2,4-D where you want to fish, because it's going to run them out of there. It's every time. And they'll say, the biologists will say, well, that won't hurt anything, it won't kill the fish. But you can't catch them.
Roland Martin was a first-round leader in Chattanooga. Here's a guy who had never won the Classic before, dying to win the Classic. The only thing missing from a star-studded resume is the Bassmaster's Classic.
I had the winning weight the first day. Just as the day ended, Yearbook shows up. And I'm saying, oh my God, those guys are spraying right here in this cove. So I take my anchor up and I run over there. I said, what are you guys doing? He said, we're spraying hydrilla. No, wait a minute. I don't want you to spray here. I mean, this is the Bassmaster Classic, and I got fish here, and I can come back here and maybe win the tournament. I said, man, if you spray the scope, you're going to kill me. You're going to ruin me.
And you can imagine what that must have been devastating to see them destroying your habitat, destroying where those bass live.
Now, like a dummy. I don't know if it was legal at the time. But why in the world didn't I make them some kind of deal?
Usually you get, you know, the kind of cooperation, if not common sense, tells you that you don't spray for weeds during the tournament.
I just couldn't deal with them. They sprayed. And I went back in the second day and not a strike.
I think that brought to light the whole controversy of the effect that these chemicals were having on fish and fishing conditions. It really played a major role in that tournament.
I noticed a airboat back in there, and they were spraying for grass. And so I got thinking about this. You know, those fish, when that poison gets in there and everything, I don't believe those fish are going to stay in there. And where's the first place they're going to go?
The area that he fished didn't look like much because he was just out in the middle of a cove, and there wasn't a whole lot of real good structure there. It was kind of a crummy looking place.
And when I pulled in on these fish, I really wasn't expecting to even fish them that much, because I didn't feel like you could win with them. I didn't think they were big enough. I didn't know how many were there anyway.
Of all things, Charlie Reed caught a limit every day out of one spot the first few minutes he was there. I don't know of any other angler that caught a limit every day.
The key ingredient was I preserved my fish. Instant I caught my 7th fish, I pulled off.
Charlie Reed was a great story. I mean, here he was, a classic rookie. He'd only been a pro fisherman on the trail for 2 years, and add to that, he was considered viewed as the old man. He was at 51 years old.
Charlie got a lot of teasing before the Classic about being the oldest rookie.
Oh, that's just their way of doing it. I'm the old man, and you know, kind of everybody give me a hard time about being the old man.
I'd always make fun of him being an old man, drink his Geritol and all that stuff. You know, I said, Charlie, you'd have been out here early with just putting all that grease and formula on your hair. And of course, heck, he was in better shape than I was. You know, that son of a gun was stout as a mule and tough.
I didn't see anybody out there I couldn't whoop. I mean, it was just one of those deals. I felt like I could compete with anybody.
The only thing I can say about Charlie, if he's watching, his wife was better fisherman.
Volga Reed is a fabulous lady, and sometime in the romantic history, he took her fishing and she liked it and became very, very good at it.
Volga and I have fished together before we were married. We've been married now 50 years, and she got to wanting to go fish bass and gals.
In the beginning of professional bass fishing, it was pretty much an old boys club, a good old boys club.
I didn't let women fish in those early days because of a security rule. And if you kept to stay together all day and in sight of each other and in sight of the live well, it wasn't appropriate to have ladies and men fishing the same boat.
The biggest problem, I think, was the bathroom. You're out on the water, you gotta go. It's kind of hard to do it if you got a woman in the boat or vice versa.
And at the time, a lady in Texas named Sugar Ferris, who enjoyed fishing, she felt like there should be a place for the women. And she organized her own circuit called Bass and Gals.
And they're just as competitive as the men, don't you think they're not? I watched them day after day. I went to all their tournaments and I watched them come in with blowing out windshields and soaking wet. And I mean, they'll fight it now. They're not scared of anything, those girls.
I think it was the competitiveness of it more than anything. You know, the bugs and the heat and the wind and the waves. It's not a glamorous sport by any means.
Voga was very competitive. We always teased Voga, or we had a joke about Voga, because she would build these little dolls, her little voodoo dolls, and you can better believe that she had a Chris doll on her refrigerator.
I did that mainly. I'm not a gypsy type person, but it's amazing how you can really freak some of those women out.
I don't know what she did to us, but every time my arm would hurt, I'd think, oh no, Voga's pinching my arm, you know. So we had a lot of fun with Voga. She's an excellent angler.
Always launching the boats, and we're checking everybody off, and all of a sudden, boo days don't show up.
Harold Sharp got a little irritated because there was no woo days. When we take off in the morning, we take off from the service yard in the police escort.
Police take you straight on out in this long line to the lake.
It all runs like clockwork. Everything's set. It's all done. It's all well planned.
So you got plenty of time.
Always launching the boats, and we're checking everybody off, and all of a sudden, boo days don't show up.
Harold Sharp got a little irritated because there was no woo days.
Well, Harold and Woo never got along. I mean, that's no secret. Everybody knows that. Harold and Woo have never got along. But Harold was one of those guys, he's like a sergeant in the Army.
But Woo's a free spirit. He does things kind of the way he wants, and you know, a man's got to do what a man's got to do.
We're going down the road, and I decided I wanted to stop at the store and get a little chewing tobacco.
That's very important, you know, when you have something like that. So, you know, it's just a question of priorities.
It wasn't going to take me but a few minutes to run in there and get it.
We don't know where he's at. We don't know what's happened to him. We don't know whether he's broke down and needs help or what.
So finally, Woo is the last boat to be launched. And he asked Woo, said, Woo, how did you get out of line?
I said, I just stopped at the store for a minute to get a couple bags of Levi gas.
And I kind of went off the deep end and chewed him out good about it.
Because if you remember Harold, he could jump your cave, and he did. He jumped Woo's cave.
Don't you ever do that again. So the next morning, they had a meeting with the drivers. I don't care what they will say. You don't stop for nothing. If they're dying, you get them to the ramp. And to this day, that's the speech they get every morning. That's the Woo Days rule.
I think one of the greatest stories, one of the most memorable stories in classic history is the introduction of Danny Correa.
The thing I remember about Danny Correa, of course, he was young, but he was also from the Northeast, and he had that Northeastern accent.
Being the Yankee, and I had the strong Boston accent at the time. I think I've lost a little bit of it now, being down south so much.
Makes the Classic through the Federation route. Now, at this point, no Federation representative has ever really contended for the Classic. But where we really got to know him was in the press conferences every day that occur right after the weigh-ins.
Danny Correa has turned out to be such a neat guy because, number one, he was not from the South. He spoke funny, as we all said.
And I get up there and I started talking, and just as you look out there and everybody was like, you know, blown away. And they really, it was tough to understand because I was nervous, of course, and I talk really fast when I'm nervous.
What's it meant to you to qualify for this Classic and do so well?
Well, qualifying for the Classic was the best thing that ever happened to me. It's, you know, it finally makes you decide where you're going to go in your future, with fishing anyways, and I just had a great time, and I thank everybody here and everybody on Bass.
You could see the nervous on him, and he overcame his nervousness with his humor. You know, the guy is just a funny guy. He's truly got a sense of humor that he can't contain.
Danny made a commitment when he qualified for the thing. He come down and he spent like a month fishing every day. He done his homework.
He was flipping a worm in the thick milfoil.
Flipping was very new to me, you know, and all I knew about flipping was you had to get the fish out of the cover. And I remember this little knothead fish biting my line, and I jerked, and I jerked, and I jerked, and that fish had to go 20 feet above my head. And I remember looking up at it and seeing that poor fish up there. And of course I have the line in one hand, the rod in the other. I remember going boom like this with my rod, and that fish coming down like a meteor, right in the boat.
His whole attitude and his enthusiasm, and he was just so excited about everything. The press really grabbed him. And then when he started to show up and do well in the tournament, it just became a great story.
People in the industry say, hey, this event could be won by an amateur, by a Federation angler.
At the time, a Federation angler, they were called them amateurs because they hadn't fished professionally, but they'd qualified to a very difficult situation, sometimes more difficult than qualifying for the Classic. You start your Bass Club level, and then you fish state tournaments or regional tournaments, and if you stump your toe along the way, you go back and start over, and it may take 2 years to qualify through the Federation.
There was some mixed feelings about whether it would be good or whether it wouldn't be good for a member of the Federation to win.
Most of the pros, whether they'll admit it in front of a reporter or a cameraman, don't believe that the Federation guys should be fishing the Classic.
I've never been a huge fan of the Federation people getting to go. There were a group of pros competing so hard, going all year long, and paying large entry fees, paying tremendous expenses to travel across the country to compete. Then there was, in my opinion, 5 who should have gone, who didn't get to go because of 5 amateurs.
You know, I didn't qualify through, you know, the series of tournaments, but when you really sit down and look at it, you know, the qualification is actually harder through the Federation than it is through the pro circuit.
Probably in the long run, it's been a great thing for the sport. So maybe my opinion was wrong.
Gary Klein should have won that Classic. He had 2 catastrophic equipment failures that cost him that tournament.
Those are the single fish or the single moments that you'll never forget. You know, you can talk to all these guys, and they're all going to have one fish stories. It's always, you know, one fish is the difference between getting a check and finishing 10th and winning. But when you're in a position to win the Classic, those are the single fish or the single moments that you'll never forget.
Gary Klein should have won that Classic. He had 2 catastrophic equipment failures that cost him that tournament.
I got to my water and everything was perfect. The first fish that I flipped was a 3.5. And the second fish I caught was big fish of the Classic. It was a 5.5. I said, one more bite, and I got one. And about 20 yards up that grass line, I got that one bite. And when I did, I broke a clutch in my reel, and my reel free-spooled on me on the hook set. I couldn't reel the reel, and I had a 3.5 pounder pulled to the top of the water, laying on top of the grass, and my hook came out of its mouth. And I watched that fish, and it seems like slow motion forever, break through the grass and swim away.
Jerry Ryan, going into the last day, he was the leader the last day.
I was what you call sight fishing, and there were so many fish there that were small fish that weren't keepers. And I had to just sit and watch until I seen a keeper, and when I'd see a keeper, I would present a tube in front of him.
He was fishing a concrete retaining wall near a cooling pond by the nuclear plant there in Chickamauga.
If spectators would have left me alone, I had it won. I guess I had 50 boats around me, and they wouldn't sit still, and it would make the water splash against this particular wall that I was watching for these fish on, and I couldn't see to pick out the better fish, so I had to just blind casting.
He caught over 100 fish, but unfortunately for him, very few were keepers, and it was an experience watching a guy catch that many fish and knowing it was all for naught.
The drama soon built between the two classic rookies, Charlie Reed and Danny Correa.
I was able to fish with Charlie Reed on the final day. While Charlie and I were fishing, we look across the water, and there came Danny Correa.
When I run back to get loaded there, I had just a couple minutes left, and I pulled up on a little old point there, and I was fishing, and I looked over, and it was Danny was fishing. He'd just come out of the lock, and he was fishing a little point over there by me. I saw him catch a keeper and put it in the live well.
And it looked to be a pretty good size fish, and the thought both of us had simultaneously was whether that was fish that would win the Classic.
Well, we figured Danny probably had it. Well, Danny wouldn't talk to nobody.
I really believe I think I can win this. It's just for some reason it felt like I was going to win this tournament.
When we came into the weigh-in that day, we're trying to figure how much you got. You got this, you got that.
And I looked back at Jerry, and he just shook his head. Jerry's a very nervous person. He says, I only got two. I got two. And I look up at Charlie, and he goes, I got a limit, but they don't weigh what they weighed yesterday. And I'm like, God, he only weighed in 7 pounds yesterday. I figured I had about 8 pounds, you know?
He made 7 pounds, 7 ounces to take the lead. What's the scale? 8 pounds, 13 ounces.
Charlie weighs in, and I hear 8 pounds, I think 13 ounces, something like that. I'm like, God, he can't add, you know? It's like, that's terrible guess. I mean, I can guess usually within a pound or something.
From Massachusetts, Danny Correa. Youngest pro we have, 24 years old.
The atmosphere inside, people were yelling and screaming. I was like the underdog, you know?
Now, friend, you're in. Now, you realize you have to have 8-7 to pull in the lead, but you know you're in top position anyway.
Right. I get 6 fish here and a couple small ones, so we'll hope for the best.
Watch your scale. 7 pounds, 9 ounces. Unfortunately, your buddy's gonna be very proud of you.
I missed it by the big 13 ounces. I had a good showing, and you need to be proud of it.
The new champion of the Bassmasters Classic, Charlie Reed. Let's bring him out.
After I'd won, I had to make the walk up there, and when I stood up, my legs didn't want to move too good. My knees were knocking now. I was nervous. This thing had just, it was overwhelming.
My legs are shaking. I've got to thank some people. Number one, the people of Chattanooga, the people of Tennessee.
And how many people can actually say they were world champions? I mean, this is what it actually amounts to. You don't want to run around gloating about it, but by golly, I won a world championship. And that's pretty neat.
There he is, your champion, Bassmasters Classic, 1986. All right.
This has been a presentation of ESPN, the worldwide leader in sports.